The one thing I see is old electrical panels. You've got a sub panel attached.
Yes, sir.
And some of those, there might not be any room for breakers.
Correct.
And I'm saying breakers because there's some really old homes that still have screw-in fuses.
Correct. In that case, like for instance, we've been in a home where we see a 60 amp main breaker, and we'll have to advise them to upgrade the panel because oftentimes, well, 100 is good enough in Alberta. In BC, we're looking at like 200, but I've seen 150. I've seen even past 200. We have to be there for safety issues as well as upgrade issues. So I'd make suggestions in my report that can make the home better. Essentially like 3Ming. 3M is a company that takes things and makes them better. Right. And that's what I try and do as well. I walk my clients through, I see a great house, but I can see a better house if they do these little tips and tricks that I give them along the way.
All right, electrical panel, you've looked at the furnace. A lot of furnaces have humidifiers attached.
Yes, sir, and most of them are broken. Just so everyone at home knows about that, most humidifiers break. It's usually just a solenoid, and if you have a drum humidifier, typically you want to go to a drip humidifier. They're not expensive. It's not an expensive piece of equipment. It's something that can easily be replaced.
Sure. And with your humidifier, again, regular maintenance, you've got to change that
filter. That's right. Most people don't change filters. I imagine you change the filter on your car every once in a blue moon.
I do.
A house needs to be, the filters need to be changed. I always stick to a schedule, of about every 3 months. I do my furnace filter, I do my humidifier filter. If I have an HRV, I do that once every 6 months or so. But a humidifier is vital. We live in North America where we have wood structures, and wood structures need a little bit of moisture content. It's also good for your skin. It is.
Yes.
We live in a very dry climate, so. But there are times where people overuse humidifiers.
Yeah,
and
too much humidity is
correct.
going to give you condensation on the inside of your windows.
Correct.
And dripping and getting the drywall.
That turns to mildew and that turns to mold. And then before we get too far, everyone has mold in their house at some point in time somewhere. It's about using thermostatic control, humidistat control, and ventilation. That's how you mitigate this issue. Back to what you were saying about humidity on the glass though, there's a lot of ways to combat that. Like I said, with ventilation, by keeping your blinds up, because we live in Calgary, it's so hot, it's cold, it's like Katy Perry all the time. If you know that song, hopefully it was not a bad one.
For those who don't know the Katy Perry analogy, give me a better one.
Okay, a better analogy be, if water's trickling down the inside of your window, sometimes it can find its way into the flange. Like putting a beer can inside of a freezer, when water freezes, it expands and it can sometimes pop a seal, and you don't want to have blown seals inside of windows. That's essentially like having cardboard for windows, which means no R value. You have a colder home and a less efficient home.
A lot is being made of high efficiency everything these days. We've got high efficiency furnaces, but a lot of homes have mid efficiency or even older. Is it worth it to replace those furnaces? The cost of the furnace, is it worth it to replace that? Is that something a buyer should be concerned about? If the furnace is working.
Sure. I was just going to say that. There'll be a lot of people that will disagree, and a lot of people will agree with what I'm about to say, and that is, oftentimes old components, they're easy to replace, and you don't fix something if it's not completely broken. If I can replace a little component here and there and make the furnace function and work well, then why would I replace it for a very expensive furnace at this point in time? There are benefits to high efficient furnaces, but I always like to compare it to crazy, very highfalutin, luxurious cars. Like, it's hard to work on those engines where it's not hard to work on an old car. Like an old furnace, sometimes it's better off just keeping it.
All right, as long as it's working.
Yes, sir.
And you'll be able to determine that in the inspection.
Sir. That's correct. Clean it, take care of it, and she should run a long time.
All right, let's go from furnaces. We've talked about humidifiers. You mentioned hot water tanks. We've got tankless water systems. We also have the new direct venting hot water tanks. What are the differences? What should we be looking for in a hot water tank, period?
Again, everyone's got an opinion on what they like. Personally, I've always just stuck with a tank. It's cold water coming in out of the city of Calgary. Also, when you're buying a tankless hot water tank, it's more expensive. Normally, you want to couple that with salt as well because of the calcification and the hard water that we have here in Calgary. So it is nice to have it on demand. That means you can have a long, luxurious shower and your wife can have a 30-minute shower with no problems, whereas a tank, maybe you can't. Tanks, they're old school. but they've been functioning for a long, long time with a lot of history behind them, and I've got no real qualms with them. They're very hard to inspect though, so what we're looking for when we inspect a hot water tank, we're listening for ticking or sloshing around inside of the tank. We're looking for water bleeding off of the TPR, which is the temperature pressure relief valve. They're very hard to inspect, because we can't take the lid off and look at the guts, but they do calcify. Again, it's a real good reason to have like soft water on demand and on a tank.
All right, let's move from water tanks to plumbing.
Okay.
And water seems to be the biggest issue with any house inspection.
Yes, sir. Water coming from the outside and water coming from plumbing. There's a couple pipes out there that you don't want to have in your house, and they're typically in older homes or in the 90s. Poly B is one of them. I always kind of relate that to like an older fella's vascular system. Maybe the veins are dilating a little bit, and it's not normally a matter of if, it's a matter of when, but you can couple that with insurance, and then you can also mitigate Poly B.
And Poly B is gray colored.
Yes,
piping.
sir. Gray and blue, and typically found in the 1990s. It's heat, it's the exposure to UV. There's so many things behind Poly B that if you look it up online, it's kind of like a cough, and when you go on WebMD, you're gonna think at the end of the day that you have cancer. But if you're mitigating by keeping the temperature regulated and you're not going crazy with the pressure, you might be okay, because there's never been major cases in Canada, but there have been in the States with Poly B. The other one is galvanized piping, and typically we're seeing that in very, very old homes. And sometimes the rust and sediment will get into the water, which is not very good for you. So we always try to get people to go over to PEX, which is what we're using today.
That's the white stuff.
Correct. White, it can be blue, it can be red. And then there's one more, and maybe you don't even know about this one, but it's called Kitec. It's an orange, fluorescent orange. We use it for hydronics or in-floor heating sometimes. And it's been breaking down. I don't have too much on that, but I know it's very similar to Poly B.